Welcome to another edition of Thought Leaders Live, where we talk with thought leaders in business, life, and all points in between. Today, I am joined by Noémi Beres from
Yes.
joining us from Cyprus today. Noémi, thank you so much for taking time to join us. We're going to talk about how to become an outstanding podcast guest. So, welcome to Thought Leaders Live.
Thank you so much, Greg, for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be here.
Yeah, so you're actually a podcast guest who's going to talk to us about how to become a podcast guest.
Yes, that's correct.
It's kind of like when you hold up a mirror and you see the mirror is
Yeah,
duplicating behind you.
absolutely.
Um, so why don't we start out though before we get into the meat of the matter and learn a little bit about you and your journey and more about Podcast Connections, your business.
Yes, thank you, Greg, for the question. Yeah, so I've been an entrepreneur since 2007. I'm in an online space since then, doing a lot of social media marketing, online marketing, content creation. So the online space wasn't, it was very familiar to me all the time. But I was in the travel industry from 2007 up till 2020 when the pandemic hit. And we had to start basically a new company, a new business from scratch. And that was Podcast Connections, our podcast booking agency. And it was a very interesting journey, especially because it started during the pandemic when everybody started a podcast. Like no matter what you did during that time, you had a podcast. You and it was very interesting to start to work with people. I never worked with American clients, and that was the first time I ever started doing that back in 2020. So that was another experience, and then it's a different culture experience for me, how to deal with not just with European clients but with American clients as well.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your clientele, who you're helping.
It's we have a wide range of people and entrepreneurs, business owners, coaches, authors, you name it. They are in different niches. They can be anything from e-commerce to leadership coaches, holistic coaches, LinkedIn experts, sales, marketing people, you name it.
Yeah, right. And tell me why, let's get to I guess the real question is, well, why would you want to become a podcast guest? What are the benefits of it?
Oh, there are loads. We could probably talk about hours about that
Okay.
part, Greg. First of all, I think podcast guesting is one of the best networking tools available right now in the 21st century, and also in relationship marketing. Because I always tell people that that's one thing that you did the interview, but the magic starts when the interview airs, or when you stop basically recording the interview, because that's how you establish a relationship, a business relationship with the host. They can hire you on the spot, or you can help or serve each other in different ways. And I always encourage my clients to jump on a post interview call with the host and to figure out how to help each other, how to serve each other. And I've seen so many amazing business relationships blooming, friendships appearing, and it's an amazing experience what they do, people. But also, it helps you to build your authority, build your brand, and if you do podcast guesting on a long-term base, obviously it helps to grow your business, because that's the whole point. It's fun to do podcast interviews. I've been, I love doing it, but at the end of the day, it's a marketing tool, and you also promote your business. Also, you have to be careful with that part, because podcasts are not just for promotion. So that's, you need to add value and need to share your knowledge also.
Well, something you said there was kind of interesting to me. Well, all of that was interesting, but the one point in particular, where you were talking about you might get hired by the person who has the podcast. Explain that a little bit more for me.
I can tell you from my own experience. Many times I got on shows, and the podcast host, with a chat after the conversation, and they told me, it's like, oh, I would love to promote my podcast on others people's podcast. How can I work together with you? For
I like
that,
that.
just one example. But I've seen this in the e-commerce space as well, that some people, they got on the show and the host needed that type of service, and suddenly the guest became the client or vice versa. So it's always a fun experience, because everybody is an entrepreneur basically when you get on a show, so we can always figure out how to work together.
Well, let's get into some of the specifics about how you work and how people you find a podcast opportunity for people. So tell me a little bit about the research process that happens first and how to prepare for a podcast appearance.
The research, I mean, plays a very important part when it comes to podcast guesting, because yeah, for example, we use a lot of softwares tools, but also, for example, listennotes.com is a great place to check out different podcasts, their ranking, their social following. So that's a good place to start.
I'm sorry, what was that again?
Listennotes.com.
Listen
And
notes.
yeah, listen notes, yeah, it's a great website, and we've been using it since we started our company, because you can check basically most of the things about the podcast that you you want to go on or get on. And the numbers, like download numbers and so on, kind of a ballpark number, because nobody knows that for sure, but it's close enough, so you have an idea how to do that. And of course, there is YouTube, there is, Apple Podcast, Spotify, loads and loads of places where you can find the ideal podcasts. And you asked about the preparation part, and I think that's really important. Like, once you find a podcast, please listen to it, because that's the key. And I've seen this before, that so many people pitching themselves to different podcasts and they have no clue what the podcast is about. And I think probably that's the biggest mistake they can make, because for the preparation you need to listen to an episode. And of course, then comes that you want to pitch yourself to a podcast. You need to find a unique space to place yourself, because podcast hosts nowadays are getting too many, far too many. We talked about this before we
Yeah.
started the interview with you, Greg. They're getting so many applications, and now AI generates all these strange podcast guest applications as well. So there are loads of that out there. So you need to stand out of the crowd when you reach out to a podcast host, because so many podcast host friends told me, I'm getting like hundreds of emails and guest applications. So
Wow.
once you pitch yourself, you need to find your basically your unique selling point, how to pitch yourself to the host that you will be chosen for that particular interview. And in order to do that, you must listen to at least one episode before the show. And let's not forget about the topics and talking points either, because that's really important to be super clear about what you want to talk about. Because when you reached out to me and you have an application form, and it's ask you basically what kind of topics I can cover. And I think that's really important, because you need to be super clear about what I'm talking about, and I need to be super clear about what I am talking about. So I think it's super important.
Well, one thing I find with the research project process, and you give me your reaction, obviously, but I feel like it's a lot like sales in that, boy, it takes time and it takes patience, and you're going to find a lot of dead ends out there. I mean, if you're trying to comb through all the podcasts that are out there and you have to listen to them, I mean, that can be a big undertaking. And you know how many, that could go on forever. How many when you're doing your research, um how many do you usually find you have to go through to find a good podcast that lines up with your target market?
I don't have exact numbers. Obviously, we have a whole team who's doing that.
Yeah.
But I remember that, like, when we started in 2020, how many podcasts they were like actually active. And so many of them actually stopped since then. So the
Oh,
whole podcast scene is changing, like from month to month, from year
yeah.
to year. It's very interesting to see that so many people just just stopped doing the podcast because it's too much work, too much
Right.
hustle. They had
Right.
no clue that it's going to involve so much energy.
Yep.
But then always new podcasts will will start. So you have to grow through a lot, that's for sure. But I think the important thing right now for us as a podcast booking agency, that we have about 700 podcasts in a network that we are connected with.
Okay.
And when we establish a relationship with the podcast host, so we always reach out, we have a chat with them before we pitch anyone. I'm not talking about like every single one, but when we see that there's a podcast host might be a great fit for multiple guests, so we'd always establish relationship first, get on a call, get on a chat. And I love getting to know the host before we can send them anyone, because I think it's just a human touch. Also, we talked about this, it's really important. It's such a different experience than just cold pitching someone.
Right. So critical. So that makes sense. To build, just like in sales, you build up your referral network, your
Yeah.
pipeline of people that you know, and that makes the process all that much easier. Let's talk a little bit about, okay, you land the podcast opportunity for a client. How do you coach them on those podcast appearances, and what are the, like you said, we said in the show notes, what are some of the, how do they create a conversation that people will remember?
First of all, we start with a strategy call once they sign up. And during the hour-long strategy call, we go through their bios, their topics, their talking points, their call to action. So everything is super clear for them. Because so many people come to us with very general topics. Like if you work in sales or marketing and they say, I want to talk about sales, I want to talk about marketing, but that's just too broad. I mean, you need to niche down. It needs to be more unique than that. And when people come to us, we also help them to form their stories, because when you are on a podcast, you have about 30-40 minutes to include everything in that conversation, and you can talk for hours about yourself and about your business, and I was born here, and what am I doing right now. So it needs to be a condensed version of that story, so we help with that as well. And also we try to teach people or explain to them how important it is to be more open and vulnerable uh, when you share your story, because that's how people align with you, that's how people understand your story and message so much better. And it doesn't matter which niche or which industry you are, it's still very important that there are so much, fakeness in the world. So when people hear an authentic conversation and they see the real you, they do business so much easier with you. And that's what I noticed when I shared my podcast interviews. People listened to it or watched it and they reached out to me, and they were touched by the story I shared or where I came from. I think that's super important.
Well, I'm curious now that you bring that up. What's your go-to story? What does Noemi say to connect with the audience? Give us your own example.
I think it's my unique selling point is that I'm European. And especially when I'm a guest on, podcasts like yours in the US, I always tell my story that I was born and raised in a small town in Hungary, and I always wanted to move abroad and experience new cultures and learn new languages. And for me, that was really important. So even at the early age of 16, I became an exchange student in Denmark, and I studied to be a Scandinavian linguist. And that's somehow unique. So when I shared that, people is like, wow, it's like, that's very strange. Like, I never
Yeah.
heard about that. And then obviously I share the rest of the story, that I lived in different European countries like Denmark, Ireland for 7 years. But then I always wanted to experience the Mediterranean lifestyle and live my life in a way that brings me joy every day. And that's why I ended up on living on this beautiful Mediterranean island, and to run a business from anywhere. And I've been working remotely since 2007, and I think that's fun, not to have a boss but to be an entrepreneur and just enjoy that kind of lifestyle. So that's kind of my story. I would say that I usually share.
Oh, thanks for sharing. I mean, yeah, when you told me about being a linguist in Denmark, and it's like, not only I think do you get to get a personal sense of somebody, but usually you reveal some sort of accomplishment that is pretty amazing. I mean, and I think any linguist, anytime I meet a linguist at all, I'm just like, wow, because I know what, I can
Thank
only
you.
imagine what goes into that and achieving that level of proficiency and that degree. Let's move on, um, and talk about something that actually goes beyond the interview itself and getting the interview, and that's the promotion around it. The promotion before, the follow up, and also the relationship building.
Oh, yes. And that's the most important part that we can't skip. And unfortunately, you still have to explain this to people that this is a marketing tool. And once you have an episode on your hand, this is evergreen content and you can use it forever. You can cut it up, you can have audio clips, video clips. Usually, the host will provide you with all these, and you can share it on your social media channels. But no matter how many times you tell people, they still don't do it, and I still don't understand. So, and because it's that's fine if you share it once on LinkedIn or in different social media channels, but you can do it several times because people won't remember what you shared 2 weeks ago, and then you can just repurpose your content basically every month with a new video clip or audio clip. And I think that's really the fun part. It's really important to tag the host because that's the whole point. I mean, you will reach the host audience and followers through all those media, social media posts, and that's the power. And everything is free because I talked on a with a podcast host from Australia, and we talked about it that so many people complain about social media, how awful it is, and so on. But for example, LinkedIn, that's kind of my space where I do a lot of business and I network with a lot of hosts. And it's basically free. You get there. Okay, not free if you have a premium membership, but it's a different story. But it's still like all the other channels are free as well. And once you share your episode, it's just so powerful because you're building your brand, you're building your authority through all these posts and your podcast episodes. I mean, people type in your name into Google and you pop up everywhere, and people will look at you just like, oh, this person like sounds real, and they appeared so many podcasts. They must have a business, or they must have been doing something well if they are everywhere and if their name is out there. So I think that's an important part. What was the other part of the question? Because I'm very bad like remembering
Yeah,
things.
yeah, no. The follow up and I think the relationship building. I'd
Yeah.
like you to focus on the relationship
Yeah.
building.
First up, the follow up. I think it's just so easy to send a thank you note once your interview is, recorded, and next day you send a thank you note. Sometimes a handwritten note can can go so can go so such a long way because not many people do that anymore. But and I also know that podcast hosts don't really get thank you notes or just even thank yous from the guests after the interview, and that would be so nice. I mean, just being kind, it doesn't cost you
Yeah,
anything.
right.
And as a go-giver by heart, for me it's really important, just say thank you, and it means a lot to so many people. And the relationship building part is, I think, crucial because in the 21st century, one of the most effective networking tool is podcast guesting. And so many people looked at me like, why? Because you already established a relationship with the host during the conversation, and it's just so easy to build upon that. I always encourage my clients to hop on a pro in it's a pro chat, basically post chat after the podcast interview, and you can figure out how to help and serve each other. You can be on each other's webinars, or you can start a coaching program together, or there are so many opportunities out there if we use it wisely, and if we can help each other out. It really depends on us, and a podcast booking agency can't do that for you. I mean, you have to do that for yourself and work on the relationship marketing part because that's where the magic happens when it comes to podcast guesting.
Well, we were talking before the show about AI and the amount of AI slop in terms of content
Mm.
that's out there, and how it's redefining a lot in marketing. And I feel like that podcasting and the human connection that it enables is going to get more and more important. How do you feel about the rise of AI and why this is so important?
I agree 100% with you, Greg. When it comes to the human connection, it will become more and more important. And especially if you lead your business in a heart centered way and you care for your clients, you care for the podcast hosts you've been working with, it's it's crucial. I've seen all these messages and AI related emails around, but it's not personal. It's nothing uniqueness about them. You don't even know if they are a real person behind these so-called like companies, because we don't know anything about them. And like these one-on-one conversation can be replaced with AI. I mean, of course, I've seen these AI generated interviews and just generic, and
Really?
it just, yeah, I mean, you can do that. You can create podcast interview through AI. So basically two people talking,
Oh yeah.
discussing some kind of topic, and that was just so odd
Yeah.
to listen to, because it's just fake or plastic, or I don't know. It's There's no human touch there. And it's not something like everything is perfect, there's no mistakes, there's no
Right.
like whatever. You don't have to edit them because everything is just perfect, and life is not perfect, and podcast interviews are not perfect either.
Right. So let's just talk for a second then about landing the big podcast interview and kind of pushing to the next level. There's some really big podcasts out there with huge numbers of people. And I suppose for you as an agency, that's the gold mine, right? I mean, that's if you can land somebody on one of those, that's fantastic. Just like anything in PR, if you get great placement. Um, any suggestions on trying to get into one of those bigger podcasts?
It really depends on what we call big, because if you are in different niches, you are in the e-commerce space, big is different than in a mindset space, for example.
Okay.
And we did work with big podcasts, and when it comes to big podcasts, it's all about who you know and from that company, or from that space. It's interesting because I was not a huge fan of placing my clients on big podcasts. First of all, it's really hard to get on those podcasts if you don't know the team or a team member from that particular podcast. So like getting on, I remember that one of our clients was, I don't know, second round for Amy Porterfield or something, but then you never hear back from them.
Okay.
And I also realized that like it's usually the same people go around on the very big podcast. So you can see the same faces, the same voices all the time, circling basically in that space. It's a very closed community. I'm not saying it's not possible to get on these shows. Yes, sometimes you just need luck or you need to know some people, but I would say it's more important to find your niche. And it doesn't really matter. You don't have those numbers or the, it's not a huge show, but it's just really tailored to your for your audience, and people are actually interested in your service or product. It's so much easier to sell your service to them than to those big podcasts, big name podcasts, where people usually listen because of the host and not because of the guests,
Right.
I would say. And I'm not against it, because sometimes it's amazing if you can get and land your client on those shows. I don't think I have a tip for that. It's about like connections,
Yeah.
connections, connections.
Sure.
So,
Well, what about I do a lot of work with manufacturers, and especially in some tight niches where maybe there's not a lot of podcasts, or a lot of podcast opportunities. Any recommendations for somebody in that predicament?
That's a very interesting space to be. For example, we started to work with e-commerce, and e-commerce is a very tight niche if we talk about that. And I think I'm not lying if I say that like about 90% of the e-commerce podcasts that are important nowadays in the podcast, we know all of them. Like they are basically among our, like, kind of in our network. And once you are in that space, I think, and you want to pitch yourself to those, first of all, you need to establish a relationship with the host, because just a generic pitch won't work with them. You need to get out, you need to establish a relationship, maybe through LinkedIn, and start to comment on their posts, and then after a while you can reach out. I think this small steps approach works best in these very tight niches, um, because it's not easy to break into those markets, and we experienced that back in 2020. But it's not impossible if you are consistent and persistent, especially in the podcasting world. You can totally do it.
Curious, as we get closer to the top of the hour, what are some of your favorite podcasts?
Yeah, I have a few. And of course, I listen to a lot of my clients and podcast host friends. And I'm not going to pick anyone from those because I don't want to be
Yeah, right.
partially here. But the I think the all-time favorite is Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO. I love his podcast, his style, and anything that he does. I think he's so open, he's so vulnerable
Okay.
about his life and the stuff he shares. And I also really like Donna. Oh my God, I always kill his name. The Story Brand podcast by Donald Miller.
Miller, right.
Yes, I love that too. I mean, it's great information. Louise Hose, The School of Greatness. Also, Jay Shetty, the Jay Shetty podcast.
Yeah, that's one.
Yeah, I listen to these basically every week. These are my favorite ones.
Uh, that's really fantastic. I guess the next thing I would say is what or ask you about is once somebody comes on, okay, they've they maybe they have a book to push or they have a new program. Is it just kind of like an engagement where they're with you for a few months and then it stops? Is there, I guess what I'm getting at, is there a way to keep kind of a sustained marketing, a sustained podcast appearance going? And do people do that? Or is it more like a campaign driven thing?
It really depends what's your purpose or goal with podcast guesting. If you're an author and if you do a book launch on podcasts, sometimes they hire us for a shorter period of time, 1, 2, 3 months, and then we do the book launch for them. But thankfully, most of our clients stay with us for a longer period of time because they do understand that podcast guesting is a long-term marketing strategy, and it doesn't happen. Nothing happens overnight. First of all, they record the episode. It takes time, maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks until it goes live. So everything is a little bit slower paced. But once you do start doing it and you build up the momentum, and you're being consistent and persistent with all that podcast guesting, it will bring you the results that you wish for. But it just needs time. Like as you building up those podcast guesting muscles, you need time doing that when it comes to the interview. So I would say many of our guests, clients stay with us for a year or two.
And what do those results look like?
First of all, as I mentioned before, it's all about building brand, building your authority, relationship marketing, really important, getting your name out there, and creating evergreen content that you can use basically forever. It's really important. And let's not forget about the networking, relationship marketing part, because that's also crucial. When people ask about ROI of podcast guesting, this is the ROI of podcast guesting that I just said,
Yeah.
because it can be measured like a Facebook ad or an Instagram ad. It's very different, but the long term effects and goals, it basically they stay there forever. It's not like an ad that something disappears, or a social media post that it stayed there for 2 seconds and the next one comes.
Well, and I think one other intangible is the trust it builds. I had a guy
Yeah,
said he wanted to work with me because he saw my clips and for some reason thought I was a trustworthy guy. So, you can really, just because it's your face, it's your voice,
yeah,
it's who you are, you can build in that added element of
absolutely.
trust. And I would add that AI right now in answer engines that learn language models are looking for those trust signals more than ever. So if you, the person, are part of a company and you appear in a lot of different podcasts, that's only going to help your case. So, one quick question I want to squeeze in. I know we're over the time here, but what do you do with people who are like, I'm bad on camera and they're hesitant to do it and they're afraid of getting in on doing a podcast interview?
It's very interesting because there's so many people struggle with that type of problem, and I don't like to listen to my own voice and
Yeah.
so on. We get those people. So sometimes when we have those people, we have two options. We can always do mock interviews with them. We record them. We can sit down together and go through how they did during the interview. And again, I mean, podcast guesting, it's all about practice, practice, practice. I mean, our first interview wasn't the best, or my first interview wasn't the best either. It really takes time until you get into that kind of habit. And also, when you are on a podcast, like, try to treat it as a conversation between two people over a cup of coffee or tea, because you don't have to think about like how many, like thousands or hundreds of people will listen to it or watch it. You just treat it as a friendly conversation between two people. You just, like, it's all about, I think, mindset as well. And we also started a program called podcast guesting jumpstart, which helps people to get started in that space. So if they struggle with things like that, like, oh, I don't like watching myself, I don't like my son, and so on, we have a 90-minute laser focused conversation, figuring out their topics, their story, and really helping them to jumpstart their podcast guesting experience. And they don't necessarily have to work with us, they can pitch themselves after that, but we basically jumpstart their podcast guesting journey.
The big thing I always say too is it's fun. I mean, once you
It
start
is.
one of these and yeah, you get to talk about yourself. I mean, what could be
Yeah.
better than that,
Who
right?
doesn't like that?
Yeah, right. Okay, Noemi, if somebody wants to work with you, they like what you're talking about, and they know they need to get out there in some podcasts, how do they get a hold of you and work with you?
First of all, I'm very active on LinkedIn, and you can get in touch with me. My name, you can just type my name in, Noémi Beres, tiny microphone sign next to my name. That's me. And I'm always happy to connect with anyone. And also, we have a website, podcast connections, plural.co, and you can reach out to us on our website as well.
And I will tell you, if you're sending Noemi an email, when you type the E, hold the E key down, and you'll see the little accent mark come up, and you can select that. That was a little tip I learned with a different guest. But Noemi, thank you so much for joining us here today. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Greg. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for joining us on another edition of Thought Leaders Live. We'll catch you on the next one.